You think working corrections in max security is tough. Try doing it where the walls themselves whisper. And the inmates aren't the only things trapped inside. Tonight, on Night Creepypasta Rules. A rookie officer learns 3 bizarre rules for surviving H block. Because ignoring the horrors is the only way to keep them contained. Maybe the air in H block didn't just smell stale. It felt heavy, coating the back of my throat with the taste of disinfectant, old sweat, and something else. A faint underlying metallic tang like fear itself had corroded the ductwork. It was a palpable pressure, different from the sterile administrative wings or the noisy chaos of general population. This air had weight. It had history. Bad history. Bad history? Echoes were different here, too. Not the sharp reverberations of the main corridors, but a thick, swallowing quality. The heavy slam of the entry gate behind me didn't just echo. It felt absorbed by the stained concrete and shadowed steel, leaving a silence that pressed inwards, amplifying the low and distinct murmur from the cells. The distant scrape of metal on the cells. The distant scrape of metal, concrete. The unnerving awareness of dozens of eyes tracking my movement. Eyes belonging to men who society had decided were better off forgotten. Locked away where their particular darkness couldn't spread. Or so the thinking went. My own footsteps felt too loud on the worn walkway. Each step a declaration of my presence, my newness. Why this job? Hazard pay helped cover debts my previous life had accrued. Maybe it was penance. Maybe it was a morbid fascination. A need to stand close to the abyss I'd barely avoided myself. Whatever the reason, doubt tasted as acrid as the air. Keep your eyes forward, Alan. Don't linger on anyone's cell. The voice beside me was low, gravelly, accustomed to command. Officer Miller, my field training officer for the first week in this notorious block. He was built like a concrete bollard, mid-50s, face etched with lines that spoke of long, hard nights and zero tolerance. He moved with a heavy certainty, his presence as much a part of the block's oppressive architecture as the bars themselves. Beside me, on the other side, Officer Evans shifted nervously. She was even newer than I was, barely out of the academy, her uniform still stiff, her eyes wide as she tried to take everything in without looking like she was taking everything in. We were the fresh meat. Miller stopped us before the main cell block corridor truly began. Under a flickering fluorescent light that cast our shadows long and distorted. "All right," he said, his voice barely above the low hum of the building's ventilation. "Forget half the regs they taught you at the academy. Down here, it's different. We got lifers, yeah, but these ain't just killers. These are the artists, the collectors, the ones who enjoyed their work." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "There are official rules, and you'll follow them to the letter," Miller continued, his gaze sweeping over both me and Evans. "But there are 3 other rules for H block. Unofficial, unwritten. You don't follow them, you don't last. Simple as that." He held up 3 thick fingers. 1, inmate puts your face on the wall. Charcoal, shit, blood doesn't matter. You find paint, you cover it. Immediately. Don't report it first. Don't ask questions. Just erase it. Understand? His eyes locked onto mine. I nodded, my throat dry. Evans gave a quick, jerky nod beside me, looking slightly pale. 2, you see a countdown scratched into a bed frame during shakedown. Numbers ticking down. You make damn sure it doesn't hit 0. Confiscate the tool. Shake down the cell again. Report the count if you have to, but stop it before it finishes. 0 is not an option. He didn't explain why. The finality in his tone was explanation enough. 3, his voice lowered further, almost a growl. You hear tapping from inside the walls. Not pipes settling, not rats, rhythmic tapping. It ain't Morse code. Don't waste your time trying to figure it out. Ignore it. Walk away. Pretend you didn't hear it. You engage with it, you're done. He looked from me to Evans, then back again. These aren't suggestions, they're survival. He didn't wait for questions, just gave a curt nod and started walking down the main corridor. I exchanged a quick, uneasy glance with Evans. Her initial academy brightness seemed significantly dimmed, replaced by the same apprehension I felt coiling in my own stomach. As we followed Miller, the low murmur from the cells seemed to quieten. Walking past one particular cell, the infamous Elias Thorne, the puppeteer, visible only as a still silhouette sitting ramrod straight on his bunk, an unnatural, synchronized silence fell over the entire tier. Every whisper, every cough, every shuffle ceased. The only sound was the hum of the lights and our own breathing. Then, from the thick concrete wall right beside me, came a single distinct tap. Not loud, but sharp, clear, deliberate, like a knuckle rapping sharply on stone from the inside. It stopped as quickly as it came. The low murmur of the cell block slowly resumed its usual cadence. Miller gave no sign he'd heard it, just kept walking, his heavy boots marking a steady rhythm on the concrete floor. Evans shot me another look, wider-eyed this time. I just focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The weight of the air, the rules, and that single, impossible tap settling heavily onto my shoulders. My first hour in H block, and the silence already felt more dangerous than the noise. That single sharp tap from inside the wall echoed in my thoughts long after Miller led us away. Evans kept glancing nervously at the concrete as we walked, but Miller acted as if nothing had happened, his face an impassive mask. Just pipes settling, I told myself. Old building, but the synchronized silence that preceded it felt deliberate, orchestrated, and the tap itself had felt personal. Days bled into the first week. H block operated on a rhythm of controlled tension. The sudden eruption of shouts quickly muffled, the heavy metallic report of cell doors slamming shut, the scrape and slide of food trays under bars, all underscored by the constant low hum of electricity and surveillance. I learned the faces, the names, the monstrous legends attached to them. Thorne remained a silent statue in his cell. Miller remained a granite presence, observing, correcting, his expectations absolute. Evans tried to maintain a professional brightness, asking questions I'd already learned not to voice. Questions Miller usually answered with a grunt or a cold stare. Then came the drawing. Routine check, third tier. I was keying open a cell door for inspection. Evans standing back observing procedure, when my gaze snagged on the opposite wall inside. My breath hitched, sketched crudely in what looked like charcoal, rough but unmistakable, was a face. My face, distorted. Eyes too wide, mouth stretched in a silent, leering grin. The inmate, a gaunt man named Peters, convicted of dissecting his victims, sat on his bunk, watching me with unnerving, placid intensity. Ruler 1 slammed into my head with visceral force. Face on the wall, paint over it immediately. A cold wave washed over me, prickling my skin. Violation. It felt like a physical touch, a claim. Officer Evans, I heard my voice say. Tight but level. Stay outside the cell. I stepped inside, eyes locked on the drawing, avoiding Peter's vacant stare. My hands felt clumsy, unlocking the supply closet down the tier, grabbing the small can of gray primer and a roller. What is it, Alan? Evans whispered as I returned, her voice hushed with naive curiosity. Ruler 1, I muttered, forcing myself back into the cell. The air inside felt colder, thicker. Peters hadn't moved, just watched, that faint, unsettling smile playing on his lips. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dipped the roller, the wet rasp of it against the paint tray sounding unnaturally loud. I started painting over the charcoal face, the gray paint swallowing the leering grin, the wide eyes erasing it. Fast, trying not to look at Peters, trying not to think about why. It took only a minute, but felt like an hour. When the gray rectangle was complete, hiding the grotesque caricature, I backed out, securing the cell door with shaking hands. The heavy locking sound echoed down the tier. Later that shift, Miller appeared beside me during rounds, seemingly out of nowhere. He nodded towards Peter's cell, saw the paint supplies we used. Any hesitation? No, sir. I lied. Good, he grunted. Hesitation is how you end up on the wall permanently. He walked on, leaving me with a fresh chill despite the block's stuffy air. Passing Peter's cell again near the end of shift, I couldn't help but look. The gray paint was drying. Flat and institutional, but under the harsh fluorescent light, a faint darkening remained where the charcoal had been thickest. A ghostly residue that seemed, if I stared too long, to still hold the barest outline of that horrifying, smiling face. Sleep became a luxury, then a memory. The crushing atmosphere of H Block, the constant low-level hum of contained violence, the memory of that charcoal grin, they seeped under my skin. I started seeing faces in the water stains on the ceilings, hearing whispers in the ventilation sigh. Evan seemed to be faring little better. Her forced brightness had faded, replaced by a permanent nervous tension around her eyes. Miller watched us both, his expression unreadable. The tension spiked during a routine cell shakedown on the second tier. Inmate Wallace, volatile, unpredictable, prone to sudden explosions of rage, had a new decoration scratched into the gray paint of his metal bed frame. Fine lines barely visible were numbers. 5. Then, slightly further along, 4. My blood ran cold. Rule 2. Count down on the bed frame. Don't let them reach 0. See this? I motioned Evans over, keeping my voice low. She peered at it, frowning. What is it? Rule 2, I said grimly. He started a countdown. Just scratches, maybe. She offered weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. We reported it. Miller listened impassively. Wallace plays games, he stated flatly. Ignore it unless it progresses. Then, handle it. Handle it. Easy for him to say. 2 days later, during morning count, I checked Wallace's cell. A new scratch. 3, my stomach twisted. Ignore it? Let it tick down. What happened at 0? Miller's deliberate vagueness felt more threatening than any specific warning. I looked at Wallace. He sat on his bunk, rocking slightly, humming a tuneless, discordant sound. His eyes, when they flickered towards me, were alight with a frantic, unfocused energy. 0 was not an option. That afternoon, citing a potential hidden weapon based on observed agitation, I arranged for Wallace to be moved temporarily to an isolation cell for observation, ordering a full, strip search level shakedown of his empty cell. Protocol, defensible, but my hands were sweating as I signed the transfer order. As they were escorting a struggling, suddenly shrieking Wallace out, I passed Thorne's cell. The puppeteer sat calmly reading as always. He looked up as Wallace was dragged past. A flicker of something unreadable. Curiosity, amusement, in his intelligent eyes. He caught my gaze. "Tick-tock, Officer Allen," he murmured, his voice a soft, cultured rasp that barely carried. Some clocks are harder to stop than others. Some merely reset. He then returned to his book, dismissing me. The shakedown found nothing substantial in Wallace's cell, just a sharpened piece of plastic hidden in his mattress. The likely scratching tool. The countdown was stopped at 3, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by Thorne's words and the raw desperation in Wallace's eyes. The mini-hook came less than 12 hours later. A series of muffled, percussive impacts echoed from the isolation wing, followed by strange shouts. Wallace had suffered a complete psychotic break, violently attacking the observation window, screaming about the 0 and the man in the walls. until sedatives finally brought silence. When I mentioned it to Miller later, his only response was a non-committal grunt. "Should have handled it sooner, matey," was all he said, his eyes betraying nothing. But there was a grim satisfaction there I couldn't ignore. Wallace's breakdown cast a long shadow. The official report cited pre-existing instability. But I knew, or feared I knew, it was tied to the interrupted countdown. Thorne's words about resetting clocks echoed. Had stopping it made things worse? Miller's callous indifference solidified my growing suspicion about him. He wasn't just enforcing rules. He seemed invested in their outcome. My nerves were frayed, wire-thin. Sleep deprivation gnawed at my focus, making the shadows seem deeper, the silence heavier. Evans was jumpy, avoiding eye contact, focusing intently on procedure. The air in H block felt thick with anticipation, like holding your breath underwater too long. It happened during a late-night shift, the dead hour when the block sank into its deepest, most unnerving quiet. I was walking the top tier, footsteps the only sound besides the omnipresent electrical hum. Then I heard it, faint at first, almost subliminal, a rhythmic sound from inside the wall to my left, between two cells occupied by inmates who rarely made noise. Tap, 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 tap. Not pipes, not settling concrete. This was deliberate, irregular, a complex, almost conversational cadence, stopping and starting unpredictably. Rule 3. Tapping from the walls. It's not Morse code. Don't decode it. My skin prickled. Every instinct screamed to locate the source, to press my ear against the cold concrete, to decipher the pattern. It felt magnetic, a hidden message scratching at the edge of my perception, meant for me. It wasn't aggressive like the drawing, or urgent like the countdown. It felt inquisitive, calculating. I could feel my focus narrowing, the rhythm pulling me in. I forced myself to move, feet feeling heavy. I unclipped my radio, turned up the volume until only a low hiss of static filled my earpiece, a weak shield against the compelling rhythm in the walls. Focus on the procedures. Check the locks. Scan the tiers. Ignore it. The internal litany was a desperate defense against the insidious pull of the tapping. It seemed to follow me as I walked, originating from different points in the wall now, always just out of sight. I saw Evans further down the tier, standing unusually still, head tilted slightly towards the wall. Had she heard it too? As I approached, Miller came around the far corner, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence. The tapping stopped. Instantly, the silence that felt abrupt, unnatural. Evans jumped slightly as Miller reached us. "Everything secure, officers." Miller's voice was flat, his eyes scanning the tier. "Yes, sir," I replied, keeping my voice steady. Evans hesitated, then spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Sir, did you hear?" "Hear what?" "Evans?" Miller cut her off, his tone sharp. "I see. Pipe settling? Rats, this old place groans all night. Focus on your duties. Alan, walk with me." He turned, expecting me to follow, dismissing Evans entirely. I saw the flicker of fear and confusion in her eyes before she quickly looked away, as I fell into step beside Miller, leaving Evans alone on the tier. I didn't need to look at his face to feel the cold certainty radiating from him. He knew exactly what the tapping was, and his insistence on ignoring it felt less like procedure, more like a desperate attempt at containment, or maybe complicity. Miller's cold dismissal of the tapping, of Evans' fear, cemented the dread coiling in my gut. He wasn't just ignorant, he was enforcing ignorance. The rest of the shift passed in a haze of hypervigilance. Every echo, every shadow, every silent stare from behind bars felt like a prelude. The air itself crackled with unseen energy, a static charge promising a violent discharge. Evans stayed close. Her earlier anxiety now hardened into pale, silent fear. The convergence began subtly, then escalated with sickening speed near the end of our rotation, just before the morning crew arrived. First, the smell. That sharp ozone and decay scent, stronger than ever, seemingly bleeding from the concrete itself. Then the lights on our tier flickered erratically, plunging us into momentary strobing darkness that made the shadows leap and distort. A wave of intense, unnatural cold washed down the corridor, raising goosebumps beneath my uniform. "Alan, did you feel that?" Evans whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, my gaze snagged on a cell further down. Peter's, the drawer, scrawled hastily on the concrete wall beside his door. Fresh and stark white this time, like chalk or soapstone, was another face. Not mine, Evans's. Her features captured with the same grotesque, leering distortion as mine had been. Ruler 1 screamed in my head. Paint. Now. But as I moved towards the cell, the tapping started. Not faint this time. Loud. Insistent. Coming from inside Peter's cell wall. A frantic, complex rhythm like skeletal fingers drumming desperately against the stone. It wasn't inquisitive anymore. It felt urgent, demanding attention. Rule 3. Ignore it. My heart hammered. Paint over the drawing? Ignore the tapping. Which rule took precedence? Peter stood pressed against his cell bars, eyes wide, fixed on Evans. A low guttural humming vibrating in his chest. "Miller, we need." Evans started towards her radio, but Miller's voice cut through the rising tension, sharp and commanding from the tier junction behind us. "Hold your positions. Do not engage. Too late." As Evans fumbled with her radio, Peters let out a choked gasp. His eyes rolled back, pupils vanishing. He began scratching frantically at the inside of his metal bunk with something small and sharp, a broken plastic shard, his movements jerky, unnatural. My blood turned to ice as I saw the marks forming. Numbers, a countdown. Starting high but scratched with desperate speed. 10, 9, 8. Rule 2. Don't let them reach 0. All 3 rules, converging on one cell, one moment. A horrifying trifecta. "Miller, he's counting down," I yelled, torn between the drawing, the tapping, the countdown. "Stand down, Alan." Miller barked, moving towards us now, his face grim, set. "Let it happen." "What?" "We can't." "Rule 2, Evans protested, horrified. The rule Miller snapped, his eyes locking onto me, cold and hard as glacier ice, is about balance, containment. You already interfered with Wallace's count, Alan. You painted over your own face too quickly. You didn't let the pressure vent. Now it's focused, stronger. Ignoring the tapping isn't enough anymore. Something has to give. The countdown must reach 0 this time, or the drawing must remain, or the tapping must be answered. Peters scratched faster. 5. 4. The tapping from the wall grew louder, frantic, the rhythm matching the numbers. The air grew colder still. "You're insane," I breathed, realization dawning. You knew what these rules really were. "They're the price of silence," Miller snarled, stepping between me and the cell. "The price of keeping whatever's in these walls contained. The price of keeping whatever's in these walls contained." Appeased. A small sacrifice now and then. An inmate pushed over the edge, a guard who gets too curious, is better than letting the whole block descend into chaos. Better than what happened to Jenkins and O'Connell when they thought they knew better. He gestured towards Evans, who stood frozen in terror. The drawing is hers. The countdown is happening. Let it finish. Let the echo chamber feed. Let the echo chamber feed. It will calm down afterwards. Sacrifice. He meant Evans. Or me. He was going to let it happen. 3. Peters groaned, his hand a blur. The tapping was a deafening, frantic pulse inside my skull. No, I wouldn't be a sacrifice. Evans wouldn't be either. In that split second, clarity cut through the fear. Miller wasn't maintaining order. He was feeding the monster. "Evans, get back!" "Seal the tier door," I shouted, shoving past Miller towards Peter's cell. "Alan, no!" Miller lunged, grabbing my arm. I twisted away, adrenaline surging. Miller was strong, but desperation gave me an edge. As we grappled, Peter shrieked, scratching, too. The tapping reached a frenzied crescendo. The lights flickered wildly. I drove my elbow hard into Miller's ribs, breaking his grip. I didn't have paint. I couldn't stop the tapping. But the countdown, 0 is not an option. I slammed my hand against the emergency cell release panel beside Peter's door, overriding the lock for 30 seconds. Risky as hell. The heavy door slid open with a sharp pneumatic hiss. Peter startled, looked up from me, scratching his eyes wide, unfocused. "1," he whispered, raising the shard. I didn't enter. Instead, I grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher mounted on the wall nearby. Without hesitating, I aimed the nozzle into the cell and discharged it directly at Peters. A thick cloud of choking white powder filled the small space, blinding him, making him cough and stagger back, dropping the shard. The countdown stopped. The tapping from the wall ceased instantly, plunging the corridor into a sudden, shocking silence broken only by Peter's choked gasps and the hissing residue from the extinguisher. Miller stared aghast. "You fool! What have you done?" Before he could react further, the overhead lights didn't just flicker. They exploded downwards in a shower of sparks and glass, plunging the entire tier into absolute suffocating darkness. From the blackness came a low, guttural sound that wasn't Peter's, wasn't Miller, wasn't human at all. It was the sound of something ancient, enraged, and now fully awake. The price of silence had just gone up. The darkness that slammed down wasn't just the absence of light. It felt thick, absolute, pressing in from all sides. The low, guttural sound that had erupted from the blackness faded, not abruptly, but slowly, reluctantly, like a beast retreating into its lair, leaving behind an echoing silence heavier than any noise. Emergency lights flickered on after a tense moment, casting long, unreliable shadows and bathing the tier in a sickly orange glow. Peters was curled on the floor of his cell, covered in white powder, emitting low, whimpering sounds. The countdown was forgotten. Miller was on his knees further down the tier, gasping, momentarily stunned from my blow or the shock of the lights exploding. Evans was pressed flat against the far wall, shaking visibly, eyes wide with unadulterated terror. My own breath hitched in my throat, adrenaline starting its sharp, painful ebb, leaving behind a trembling exhaustion. The immediate supernatural pressure, the cold, the focused intensity, had lessened, but the air still felt charged, vibrating with a residual malignancy. "Evans," I managed, my voice hoarse, radio for backup. "Tier lights failure. Inmate disturbance. Keep it simple. Keep it official." Miller pushed himself up, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You insane fool," he spat, his voice ragged. "You broke the cycle. You don't know what you've invited." Backup arrived with a clatter of boots and equipment, their expressions shifting from routine readiness to confusion as they took in the scene. The darkness, the extinguisher residue, Miller's furious accusations, Evans' near catatonic state, Peters whimpering in his cell. Miller was forcibly escorted away for observation, still raving about broken protocols and unleashed consequences. Peters was sedated and removed. Evans was quietly relieved of duty for the remainder of the shift, avoiding my gaze entirely. The official report was a masterpiece of sanitized bureaucracy. Inmate disturbance, coinciding with localized power fail. Officer Allen utilized standard protocols to subdue non-compliant inmate Peters. Officer Miller relieved pending evaluation due to stress. No mention of drawings, countdowns, tapping, or Miller's insane appeasement theory. Just another night of chaos in H Block. I spoke briefly with the warden later. A man whose eyes held the weary calm of someone who had heard too many unbelievable stories and learned to file them away under manageable risks. He commended my decisive action in preventing escalation with Peters, listened patiently to my carefully worded concerns about Miller's recent erratic behavior, and then offered me a transfer to a lower security wing. Effective immediately. H-Block has a unique pressure, Alan, he'd said. The implication clear. Sometimes a change of scenery is best for everyone. He didn't ask about the rules. He didn't want to know. Silence, it seemed, was policy at every level. Silence, it seemed, was policy at every level. Walking out of H-Block for the last time felt like surfacing from crushing depths. The air in the main corridor seemed impossibly light, breathable, but the silence that followed me wasn't empty. It was the silence of the echo chamber, momentarily quieted perhaps, but not gone. It had seen me. It had focused on me. And in defying Miller, in breaking the established balance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't ended anything. I had only changed the rules of engagement. Leavenworth became a memory etched in scar tissue. I took the transfer, worked the lower security wing for a few mandatory weeks, then resigned. Put hundreds of miles between me and Kansas. Found a cheap apartment in a nondescript building in a city where nobody knew my name. Tried to stitch together the semblance of a normal life. A mindless security job at a warehouse. Evenings spent staring at walls, trying to outrun the echoes. Sleep offered little escape. Dreams were a chaotic reel of distorted faces on concrete, numbers scratched into metal, the chilling rhythm of unseen tapping, Miller's furious eyes, Evans's silent terror. I tried contacting Evans once, through official channels, just to know if she was okay. Request denied. Privacy protocols. She'd vanished back into the world outside the walls, or perhaps been swallowed by the system's need for silence. I never saw Thorne again, but sometimes in those fleeting moments before sleep, I'd hear his soft, cultured voice. Tick-tock, Officer Allen. Months passed. The rages of the trauma began to dull, replaced by a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. I learned to live with the hypervigilance, the way my heart leaped at sudden noises, the reflexive scanning of hands, the aversion to enclosed spaces. I avoided silence, kept a radio playing low constantly. Never talk radio, never oldies stations. Just bland, forgettable music. It was raining one Tuesday night, a soft, persistent drizzle against the window pane, different from the violent downpours of Mississippi or the sudden tempests near Leavenworth. I was sitting in the worn armchair, trying to read, the only light coming from the lamp beside me. The apartment was quiet, save for the gentle rhythm of the rain and the low hum of the ancient refrigerator. In the kitchenette, normal sounds, safe sounds. Then I heard it, faint, almost imperceptible beneath the rain. A light, rhythmic sound. Tap, 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 coming from the wall beside the window. My blood went instantly cold. Pipe settling? The neighbor? It stopped. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Just the rain. My heart was pounding. Imagination. Stress. Had to be. It started again, a little more distinct this time, from a slightly different spot on the same wall. Tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap. The pattern was complex, irregular, chillingly, nauseatingly familiar. It wasn't Morse code. It wasn't random. It was the same inquisitive, calculating cadence I'd heard inside the concrete walls of H-Block. Panic seized me, cold and absolute. No, impossible. I was hundreds of miles away. This was a normal apartment building. Thin walls, noisy neighbors, old plumbing. That's all it was. I stood up, walked towards the wall, hand trembling as I reached out to touch the cool plaster. The tapping continued, seemingly right beneath my fingertips now. a secret conversation happening just beyond the barrier of paint and drywall. It knew I was listening. The realization hit me with force of a physical blow. The echo chamber wasn't the prison. The prison was just the amplifier. The perfect resonant cavity built from stone and suffering. But the thing itself, the entity born of echoed pain and madness, it wasn't bound by concrete walls. It had focused on me, on my defiance, on the disruption I represented, and it had followed. The tapping continued, patient, persistent. Here in my small, anonymous apartment miles and months away from Leavenworth, the rules didn't apply. There was no Miller to enforce a twisted balance, no Evans to share the terror, no Thorne to offer cryptic warnings. There was only me, the listening walls, and the horrifying certainty that the silence would never be safe again. The echo had found a new chamber, and this time, there were no rules for survival. Alan escaped the prison, but the echo chamber followed, still tapping from inside the walls. If this chilling cell block story gave you the creeps, hit like, share, and subscribe. Tonight, Creepypasta Rules. Some walls don't just keep things out, they keep you in.